Hey guys, and welcome to your daily December download. I just got back home. Besides one recorded episode outside the house, I'm finally back home with my usual setup and everything. Well, I just got back home. When I say just got back home, I mean just got back home. So nothing's actually set up, really. I just set up the bare essentials so I can record this video before it's due tonight. The thing that I wanted to talk about is realism versus art style. If you know anything about gaming history, is that games, because of graphical limitations, had to depend on art style over realism. That's just a fact of how games had to be designed for the sake of, existing or making your game appealing. You couldn't make many things look that realistic. But as graphics have improved and have gotten better, realism has become way more obtainable. It probably started with the PS2 generation, but really started coming to a head in the PS3 generation, where games were finally can look good enough to go for realism. Problem is, realism only ages poorly. It never ages well if you go for realism. Art style usually looks... There are PS2 games and there are PS2 games that still look better than PS3 games that came out a few years later. It's just a fact. Art style can carry a lot more than realism can, even though realism may be a technical showcase at the time. Over time, since technicality is going to get better, it's going to look worse. So the common thing with not hardcore gamers, but like gamers who are a little bit older a lot of the time, or grew up in a very certain era, are very much about, no, graphics are bad. Everything should just be about art style. I'm tired of realism is bad. See, the thing is, now, while I agree not everything needs to be realistic, and personally I have an affinity for cartoony graphics more than I have for realistic graphics. That's just a personal preference. But realism isn't bad. In fact, the whole idea that there's art style versus realism is a very stupid debate in the first place, because realism is an art style. People act like paintings don't exist. We have been making models and paintings, and all of it has been trying to emulate reality. We had movies that were black and white, we went from pictures to movies that were black and white, to color pictures, to color movies with sound. Everything is trying to emulate reality. Whether you have an opinion on a positive opinion about that or not is a different story, but it is a constant form of art, that there's always going to be a subsect that is trying to reach a certain level of realism, to be able to draw, no one would deny that being able to draw so good that it looks like a photograph is crazy talent. But for some reason in the gaming community, there seems to be a strong sentiment that realism is bad and everything should return to art style, because when they're both art styles, again, at the end of the day, they're all art styles. You just want more colors, more stuff like that, or more cartoony graphics, which again is fine. That's my preference also. But there is like I said earlier, there is the downside of realism. The realistic downside is that you could only get so far before it starts looking bad in retrospect. So it's no longer graphically impressive, so what do you have left? But I think that statement is no longer a problem. With the PS5 or even PS4 generation, we've gotten to a point where graphics are kind of about as good as they're probably going to get for a really long time. And they look really good. I've been playing The Last of Us Part 1 remastered. and I'm like, because I've not remastered, the remake. I've been playing the remake, which because I've been at my cousin's house and I had nothing to do. I beat the game, started playing on New Game Plus, and I was having a good time. And multiple times my aunt would walk in and just go like, "Man, that almost looks like real life." And it's like, well, for me as a gamer, it doesn't, but like for someone casual, yeah, it does look almost real. And that's about as good as the graphics need to really be right now. And so realism is a perfectly reasonable standard to aim for. It's not a negative in the long run of gaming, because art in general, if you view games as art, you have to admit realism is an art style. And if it accomplishes that goal in a realistic way, that is something that still deserves praise just as much as Bomb Rush Cyberpunk as Last of Us Remake. They both deserve praise for completely different reasons and must be judged on their own terms. You can't and also we live in an era where we're not just getting just realistic games anymore. In the PS3 era, there was definitely an argument that could be made that most games were going for realism even when they didn't have to. But we live in an era where indie games are coming out every minute, every day. You have art styles. There are tons of art styles out there. Tons of 2D art. Tons of 3D stylized art. Cell shading. Hi-Fi Rush got released this year. That is something that does exist and come out. Anime games come out all the time. Arc System Works is pumping out fighting games every year. These things exist. Art style and stylishness exist, but realism is also an art style. So you shouldn't disrespect it just because it's not your cup of tea. That's my video for today. Just some food for thought.